Exactly.
So we got some one-on-ones. We got some highlights. We got some practice reports from Tuesday. We'll discuss coming up next here on Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks again for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Shout out to all the everydayers out there. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The Oklahoma Sooners allowed media to view quite a bit of practice on Tuesday. Jay, from everything that we saw on the social medias, the practice reports that came out on various websites, what was the thing that stood out the most to you?
Honestly, I think it was the text message that you sent me about how you feel a little bit more better about the offensive line. And I love that because when you said that and you sent the tweet from our guy, Gerald McCoy, Geraldini 93, the former Sooner and Tampa Bay Buccaneer and future Hall of Famer, he pointed out that the defensive line took 4 L's in the 4 videos we saw that Braden Drum put out there. And it wasn't that the defensive line was like getting their butt kicks, but it was the offensive line did just enough to slow them down to where they couldn't get as much pressure on the quarterback as you would typically want from the defensive line. Now, this isn't saying that the defensive line is going to be bad or anything. Honestly, I still feel like this defensive line is probably going to be one of the best in the SEC, if not the best. But Gerald McCoy pointed out the way that the players were actually going through their moves. And, as an expert tactician on the defensive line, he broke it down for everybody. And I like the fact that he pointed out defensive line took some L's and the offensive line did just enough to force them to basically say it took them about 4 seconds through this line to get 4 to 5 seconds to get to the quarterback. And typically the ball is getting out between 2 to 3 seconds. And if John Mateer does that consistently, boy, it's going to be hard to be able to get enough pressure on him. So the offensive line is holding up the way that we hoped. And that is all we asked for. Hold up enough, give John Mateer just enough, give him the 3 seconds that we know that he will be beneficial to him. He'll push for the 4 to 5 seconds on his own and be able to make plays. That's the thing that jumped out the most to me.
One-on-one drills are really difficult to gauge how well someone's performing in a practice, especially along the offensive line, because offensive line play is about unit play. I mean, there's no position group that is as connected as the offensive line is. Everything you do, a lot of it depends on your splits. If you're an offensive tackle, you're split with the guard, your communication with that person, passing guys off in rushes, being aware of everything that's going on around you. Being able to line up and just go one-on-one with somebody, that can be a little bit tricky because you don't have that guy next to you. And it's just going to feel a little bit different. So the fact that the offensive linemen were holding up, and I don't think that they were just doing just enough. They were winning these reps. And the only one that was like questionable was David Stone's rep. And I can't remember exactly who it was against. Maybe it was against
Eddie Pierre Louis.
Eddie Pierre Louis. So but Eddie Pierre Louis, he didn't get blown up. Did he get walked back? Okay, maybe. But as Gerald McCoy points out, it took David Stone quite a long time in football terms to get Eddie Pierre Louis back into where the quarterback was. If you have a quarterback that's able to manipulate the pocket and does a good job stepping around that pressure, if you're not getting pressure in 1 to 2 seconds, you're not going to get pressure. And if he's going to get the ball out quick, you're not going to get that pressure. I was really encouraged by Jacob Sexton's rep against R. Mason Thomas. I think to me, that was the one that stood out the most because R. Mason Thomas has got great speed, great athleticism, great quickness. Jacob Sexton is a big dude, and he's strong, and he's been working a lot on his flexibility. There was a note, I think it was from George Stoy of Sooner Scoop, maybe, or Brandon Drum, I can't remember which one, of OU Insider, talking about how he's been doing yoga this offseason to help improve his flexibility. And it stood out. I mean, Armisen Thomas is about as quick as you'll see in the SEC, and Jacob Sexton was able to hold up against him, and he moved really, really well and just kind of overpowered him as well. And that was a really, really encouraging sign for me. I think the offensive line is going to be better than what we expect them to be. And I think a lot of that expectation comes from what we saw in 2024. If you can have this group of 5 that's projected to start right now, starting for a majority, if not all of your season, this is going to look a lot better than what we saw last year.
You know what? I'll add to that, John. If this group of 10 is good and healthy, I mean, that's the big thing we were concerned about. Knock on wood, has been health and having, attrition surviving throughout the season. If we can only have to rely on the 10 that we know that we want to play, this offensive line is going to be almost light years ahead of what they were last season, because we've got the players in place that can actually do this. And that's where I'm not as concerned. The questions are there for the offensive line, but if Pierre Louis and Fabichuewu goes out there and they do what they're supposed to do, I'm Gucci. I think that this entire offensive line will be able to hold up. I have no concerns on the tackles whatsoever, and I also know that John Mateer is going to do a great job of making sure he gets rid of the ball before it is too much of a concern, especially with Derek Simmons on the right-hand side of him. He can see that. He'll be prepared for it. And I think Wayward will be able to hold up just enough to where, I mean, heck, he was an SEC Player of the Week one week, Offensive Lineman Player of the Week. So we obviously know he has the capabilities. He's just got to be consistent. Another one-on-one that I saw was Elijah Thomas, the true freshman. He went up against Jacobe Johnson. Now, this does make me have a little bit of concern about Jacobe, even though I am very high on the 6'2" corner with his athleticism. But I think Elijah Thomas is just an alien, and he hit him on an inside route, caught it, and bounced out for the touchdown. And I was like, okay, yeah, I think he's just that good in comparison to Jacobe Johnson being a liability. I think Jacoby's going to be fine, especially if we're mainly playing Eli Bowen and Gentry Williams, and you rotate Jacoby in and use his size to our advantage and his speed and athleticism. But I think Elijah Thomas is going to be someone that's going to be just absurdly talented for us going forward. And it's going to be really hard to keep him off the field, even with roughly 5 dudes that you should be playing ahead of him. Elijah might find a way to make him to end up in the top 3.
That just continues the buzz that we've been hearing about Elijah Thomas all spring. It just seems like every day that somebody's able to get out to practice, Elijah Thomas is making noise. He's making plays out there, which again, that's not something we were hearing from our true freshman wide receivers a year ago. That's a very different thing. The other thing about that stood out in those one-on-ones is, okay, one-on-ones for wide receiver versus defensive back, tight ends versus linebackers or safeties, those are honestly set up for the defender to lose. Those are going to be really, really difficult for those guys to win. But they were winning a lot of those reps. They were very, very competitive. There was a lot of balls that just weren't catchable because they were blanketing them. And that was really, really encouraging. There was only one rep where I saw somebody get kind of quote unquote burned. And that was the John Locke versus Michael Boganowski rep. But I'm not concerned about that at all. Again, it's a one-on-one. Coverage units, they work as a group, right? Just like offensive line plays offensive line as a group, defensive backs and linebackers, you play coverage as a group. You don't play, generally speaking, alone on an island. There are opportunities, there are times, but especially if you're a safety, there's most of those occasions you're playing in coverage with guys around you to help you in coverage as well. And that kind of helps determine your keys and how you're going to drop and how you're going to attack a receiver, how you're going to expect them to break, because you're going to expect there to be help one way or the other. And so anyway, I'm not concerned about all that, but I did think that the defensive backs and the linebackers did hold up very well in those one-on-one drills that we saw, which I think is encouraging, man. It's part of this growing defense that's going to be really good. When we saw guys like Courtland Guillory play really, really well in his one-on-one rep. So that's, again, it's encouraging signs.
The only other one I saw that well, there's no concern here whatsoever, but it's one of those that we need to make sure we pay attention to. Honestly, it's not really us as fans. I think it's more so the staff, and I think they recognize this, is that you should never put Isaiah Sategna on with Kendall Daniels, because Kendall Daniels, as athletic as he is, he ain't keeping up with Sategna. And that was 100% proven in that route when he hit him on that out. It's nothing against Kendall Daniels. It's just Sategna is built as a slot guy to be that fast and really quick on the outside. You want Daniels to be rushing the quarterback, or you want him standing in the middle of the field and ready to jump and break something up. You don't want him chasing one of them slot dudes like a Sategna. And Sategna showed you why you're going to do that, which honestly, he more so showed you why you're going to see a lot of him and Deion Burks together. I like the fact that we've got two dudes like that. We don't have one. We got two dudes that are lethal. So if one unfortunately goes down, knock on wood, you got another one that can step up and make it happen.
Yeah, the Isaiah Sategna freight train is just going full steam ahead. I think that guy is about to have a really good year for the Oklahoma Sooners. The Oklahoma Sooners are projected to land a couple of prospects in the 2026 recruiting class. We'll discuss them coming up next here on Locked On Sooners.